after a gutting result at Wembley on Sunday to conclude one of the greatest European championships in my lifetime, I've just about managed to pick myself up off the floor to do this week's episode. Football didn't come home, but in a way it kind of did. To see the nation so united was something I'll remember for the rest of my life, and I'm sure you will too. Each member of that England squad has done us proud this summer, and losing on a penalty shootout doesn't change that. I'd just like to say we at Full On Football are absolutely appalled at the racial abuse being aimed at Marcus Rashford, Sancho and Saka, and something needs to change. It's not acceptable, and I, for one, stand tall with them. Harry, thanks for joining me tonight. How are you feeling?
I echo what you said, mate. Unfortunately, as is often the case, the headlines have been dominated by the abhorrent racism targeted at England's young trio as opposed to what was an incredible tournament. It's become an all too regular occurrence in English football, which is made worse largely on social media platforms. Much more needs to be done by these platforms in creating greater transparency in order to sniff out the scum involved in these incidents. These innocents are not football supporters. They're the lowest of the low within our society, and they need to be made responsible for their actions. Marcus Rashford, Bukayo Saka and Jadon Sancho are a credit to our country. They're the future and lifeblood of our national football team, role models for generations to come, and we stand with them, and they will be back. No doubt about it. They will be back. Now, despite the negative headlines, the positives born out of Euro 2020/21 have overwhelmingly outweighed these. And through the course of the show, Ben and I will show you why you should remain very positive as we find ourselves less than 18 months already from our next major tournament.
Very well spoken, mate. Absolutely on the money there. So section one of what we're looking at tonight, we're looking back on the tournament and asking the question really of what have we learned? I mean, looking back on you could argue a successful tournament. I know some people might say you didn't win it, but we haven't got to a final for 55 years. That has to be considered a success to some degree. And looking back, and like I said, what have we learned? I'll start off, I'll ask you, who was England's player of the tournament?
Oh, that's a great question. Player of the tournament, I think there's probably... Oh, Christ. You've done me. There's probably 4 or 5 names that I can throw into that.
And that says everything, doesn't it? That says everything. That's how many positives there are. The fact you can pick from 4 or 5 and probably justify a case for all of them.
Yeah, that's it. And I'll just give a couple off the top of my head for different reasons. So Raheem Sterling was absolutely superb. I maintained earlier on the tournament that I was lucky. I thought he was lucky to start, but he was absolutely superb every time he pulled on a shirt. His attitude, work rate, final ball, finishing touch was excellent. He was in the team of the tournament. I believe. Although Harry Maguire was an absolute rock at the back when he came in, I don't think he put a foot wrong. For that reason, you could argue about him. And Calvin Phillips, for similar reasons to Sterling, it was a bit of a mixed bag on opinions on him coming into the tournament, whether he was really going to play. And he was just sensational every time he walked over the white line. So those 3, along with probably Luke Shaw, who was just brilliant, were probably my pick. What about you?
It's interesting. You've rattled off all of those names there, and I find it hard to disagree. And you're still leaving out the likes of Declan Rice, who I thought was outstanding in every game of football I think he played in, to be honest, particularly the Croatia game in him and Calvin Phillips. And as the tournament grew, so did he. Thought he was outstanding during the tournament. Kyle Walker, from a defensive perspective, was faultless. He had one shaky game. Was it Ukraine? If I remember rightly, he had a shaky game positionally, but his pace and strength just offers so much more than you lose, doesn't it? What a tournament he had. Raheem Sterling. Sorry, mate, go on.
I was going to say, who surprised you the most? Just before we go into that, who surprised you?
No, that's a great question. Probably Bukayo Saka, because I wouldn't have... If it was me, I wouldn't have given him any minutes. I don't think it'd have been a 23-man squad. He wouldn't have been in mine. That's what I'll say. And I don't think he was in Gareth's, considering he was, number 25, number 26. So That's the biggest surprise from this tournament for me. And that's not because I didn't think he was a good player. I knew he was a good player before the tournament. I've seen him play for Arsenal. It's just that we are absolutely spoilt for choice in that area. And you're heading into that game against Czech Republic when he's been given the chance. He's probably seventh choice in the pecking order. You're looking at the 7 players that can play across those front 3 positions behind Kane. I have no doubt in my head he's 7th choice for nearly everyone. And he's got a man of the match against Czech Republic, and he's played his way into the tournament, and he's been an integral part of it. But in terms of answering the question, I think if I was made to choose one, despite everybody you mentioned, by the way, we left out John Stones. John Stones was outstanding as well. There's a good 7 names, and one that I need to make a public record before I do answer the question. Jordan Pickford, what a tournament he had, and particularly in the penalty shootout, when Jorginho steps up to take that penalty to win it for Italy, albeit they won the penalty shootout in the end, the pressure to keep us in it, and he pulled a rabbit out of the hat and made the save. Massive, massive moment, but could have swung the tie England's way. It didn't, but it could have done, and I won't forget that. And he had a great tournament. But the answer for me, I think, just in terms of effectiveness, was Raheem Sterling. I think he probably was our player of the tournament. I mean, something for me that I've learned over the course of this tournament is I've been critical in the past of the 3-4-3 formation used for England. I feel as though it doesn't get the best out of the personnel at our disposal, particularly Mount, Foden, Grealish, that attacking midfield position. It dies a death. You don't get them in. I stand by that. I still am not a big fan of it from the start. Having said that, from a tactical flexibility perspective, how pleasing is it for you to see England able to use about 3 different systems within a match?
No, absolutely. I echo what you said. I was never a big fan. I feel it was awkward at times. It doesn't, like you said, you feel like it doesn't necessarily got our best players into their best positions. But I've never known in my lifetime, I go back to it, and I'm not very old, but watching England over my lifetime, we've never really done anything other than, well, it was a 4-4-2, and then it was a 4-2-3-1, and we never diverted from that. You could call that strength, but in modern football, the advantages that gives you of being able to change formations for whole games, for periods within games, to suit the opposition is such a plus, and it's something that I never thought I'd see. I say I never thought I'd see. I couldn't see from this England team from Gareth Southgate at the start of his tenure, and it's been fantastic, really. And although I quite often disagreed with the shape that he picked, he's more, until the final, which ultimately, if we win the penalty shootout and things, on another day we would, he's a genius. So I don't think you can be too glass half full. You can't be too critical on Southgate, because if we do win the shootout, which ultimately, I don't care what anyone says, in my opinion, is a lottery, you're talking about a masterclass. You're talking about tactical prowess. You're talking about everything positive about Southgate. And a penalty shootout shouldn't take away from that, because ultimately that is all it was, a lottery, a couple of strokes of a football, which changed history. You cannot deny that he has turned England into a very shrewd outfit that can play several different ways and play several different ways really, really well.
And that's refreshing. And, it's not so much that I like the formation. I stand by the fact I don't think it gets our best players in, but it's the fact that we can utilise a few different systems and do it well is a strength. Something I've learned and seen with my eyes that we can do, and it can only be a good thing for English football. Something you mentioned to me before the show was standing up to be counted. Do you want to tell me a bit about that regarding this England team? What you meant by that?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is that in previous tournaments gone by, and it's not about the tournaments gone by shouldn't have any bearing on these group of players, because it wasn't then. But you look back to that golden generation that we, when me and you started watching football, your hero, Steven Gerrard, your likes of Wayne Rooney, my favourite player for a good 10 years, Frank Lampard, John Terry, Rio Ferdinand. in the big moments, did they really stand up to be counted? And we're not going to get into the debate about systems and was it right for them and were the coaches great, managers great at that time? Probably not. Did it help them? No. But the really big moments when it really mattered, and I mean major tournaments, I don't mean qualifiers like David Beckham against Greece. I don't mean Steven Gerrard against Poland in whenever that was, 2010, 2007, around that time. I'm not talking about major moments. Have they stood to be counted? Now, the abuse that players like Raheem Sterling have got, the criticism towards him, and me included sometimes about his final ball I thought was always there. The abuse that players like him, like Harry Maguire, has had over the last sort of 12, 18 months. Players like Jordan Henderson that have gone through, really hard, difficult times. They've come through that to a point where in these big moments, they are standing up to be counted. They're putting in incredible performances. Jordan Pickford, who I echo what you said prior about him, about his performance in that final. He was absolutely outstanding. A year ago, I said he should be nowhere near the England team, and I thought his performances weren't justifying that. He was nothing short of superb in the entire tournament. Absolutely warranted his place. And his moments like his players like that, stand up to be counted. That is what it comes down to, because, like I'll go back to it. We've had incredible players that are probably will go down as more talented than the group we have now, that did not stand up in those big moments, and that is the most pleasing thing for me to see, that these lads, when things are tough, and it didn't quite, we were 99% there, but in almost every moment they did stand up, and that is to me something that can, bodes well for the future, especially because most of them aren't at their peak yet.
That's what excites me, absolutely. And looking at players like standing up to be counted, one player probably for me wouldn't, well, no, forget the word probably, he wouldn't have been in my starting 11 at the start of the tournament. By the way, quickly, you mentioned on Jordan Pickford, I'm with you, he wouldn't have been in my squad and he was fantastic. But Calvin Phillips would not have been in my starting 11 at the start of the tournament. That is something that went fantastically well. What a player. I know they called him the Yorkshire Pirlo. He was utilised very differently for England, almost like a Kante role on it, up and down. He was everywhere, covered more ground than anyone really. What a player, and that's something I've learned, how good Calvin Phillips actually is, because I thought he was just a deep line playmaker, picks the ball off the back four and springs passes about. Admittedly, that's down to my own lack of due diligence. I don't watch Leeds United as much as I probably should, but he is so much more than that, and the energy that he showed. Another one that he can hold his head high, and what a tournament he had. Something else for me, mate, that I've learned is Gareth Southgate is absolutely the man for the job for me. Going into the World Cup in Qatar, he's got my 100% backing. I believe he should be in the job. I look at football management, I think it's probably 80% people skills, man management. Albeit there are things that he does from a tactical perspective in terms of team selections or, shapes and things like that, where maybe I differ in terms of opinions. But in terms of the face of English football, I couldn't be more proud of the type of bloke he is. I couldn't have asked for anything better in terms of a man manager, in terms of the way he deals with the press. And that is 80% of his job spec. And in terms of, in my lifetime, I'd never seen England in a semi-final, and he gave me that in 2018, and I'd never seen England in a final, and he's given me that this time. I have to back the bloke going into 2022 Qatar. That is something that I have learned from this tournament.
Have you ever believed in him more than you do at this very moment?
I've never believed in any England manager more than I do at this very moment.
And that says it all, because you talk about Fabio Capello coming in to manage England in 2008 on the back of winning a World Cup with Italy with the crop of players that he had, and there was never really a moment where I ever believed in anything more than what we'd been accustomed to seeing, which was bang average and stinking the place out. Now, I echo everything you said. At the face of English football, you look at the way he conducts himself, you look at the class, tactics aside, decisions aside, you look at the class that he conducts himself in day to day. He does not let his standards slip. You look at the very best managers in world football, your Pep Guardiolas, Jose Mourinho's, your Jurgen Klopp's, you often see them rattled. You often see them let themselves down in an interview with the way they might conduct themselves. You might think, oh, you lacked a bit of class there. And that's not to knock their managerial, managerial prowess or anything like that. But they do occasionally, quite often sometimes, let themselves down. Southgate conducts himself with utmost class from, the first minute to the last, gracious in defeat, the way he consoles his players, the way you can tell the way the players that are left out, the way he keeps them on board, the way he conducts himself in interviews, takes all of the responsibility on his own shoulders, doesn't let it affect the players for 1 minute. And we've spoken before, Jose Mourinho, when they win, it's all down to me, and when we lose, it's nothing to do with me. And Southgate couldn't be more different than that. And that's why I am so pleased and optimistic going forward that we will get there.
So there you have it. Gareth Southgate, honestly, he's the man for the job. You've got to back him. It's not all doom and gloom. I've been inconsolable for about 2 days. I mean that. I've really struggled to talk. It's been really difficult. I've been very upset. But ultimately, we have to realise what we've got right now. We have to thank Gareth Southgate for the job he's done and look at what we've actually learned about this England side in terms of their mentality and where we are going, and be positive about what can happen in Qatar next year. This is Full On Football.
Two days on from the final, we can sort of look back with a bit less emotion than we did at that time. Alcohol-infused emotion, probably more, for most people.
Yeah.
3 years ago against Croatia, scoring early seemed to be our Achilles heel and led to us sitting quite deep, where we eventually got broken down. And when we did get broken down, you didn't feel like there was an obvious direction to go in. Was it a similar story in Sunday's final?
I know you've set me up to say yes. I don't think so completely. I thought it was a different game to the Croatia game. I thought in the Croatia game it was a complete, from sort of, we scored in the 3rd minute, literally from about 10 minutes in, it was for the entirety of the game. We just let them have the ball, didn't press them, didn't make things difficult. I didn't think England did that. Obviously, we scored, was it the 2nd minute? I thought for the first half an hour, we approached the game as if it was 0-0, to be honest. So I wouldn't go quite as far as that. But I did think...
Have we kicked on then since 3 years ago? Did you feel, at least for the first half, that we were sort of on a level pegging with Italy? We were in the game and we had as much chance as they did, as opposed to the Croatia game. We felt like we were very much, although Croatia weren't a great side, I don't think, it did feel like we were inferior. It didn't really feel like that, did it, against Italy?
You're right. Up till half-time. It was second half where the class showed, and there was a definite gulf between the two sides. But I do feel that, and I can see the link, I do feel that came down to the fact we allowed them to do it. I think that probably was to do with the 1-0 lead. The difference, I think, was that we did it from minute 5 against Croatia. We did it from minute 40, 45 against Italy. And that's what I'm trying to get at.
In terms of the shape, although it wasn't a surprise to me, I was quite disappointed at the three at the back. But like you said, for the first half an hour, it seemed to be paying off. We seemed to have a lot of energy. Italy weren't quite sure of where to exploit, where to be. I felt like they were winning our individual duels. It seemed to be working, but ultimately, do you feel that it comes back to sort of your Gary Neville paying Italy a bit too much respect with the way we sort of went about the game?
Far too much respect. And on Gary Neville, I heard him saying after 90 minutes something like, admittedly, had the beer goggles on or whatever you want to call it. I don't fully remember everything he said, but it was something along the lines of having to allow Italy to have the ball. And that was after 90 minutes heading into extra time, which I couldn't disagree more strongly with. And albeit if they do have more of the ball, I have no doubts if we get in their face and make it hard, I have no doubts they'll have 55% possession, but they won't have 65, they won't have 70, and that's the difference. 55 isn't a domination. Germany had 55% possession. People don't remember that. So, Italy ended the game with sort of 65%. And I think the formation, it was, like you mentioned, it wasn't a shock. And people will say, obviously, it worked because we were 1-0 up. And for the first half an hour, I think we were a better side. But I don't think the first goal was anything to do with the formation, albeit Walker overlapped and Trippier crossed the ball, 2 right backs on the pitch, involved in the goal. I think it was just more to do with the fact it was a break. Obviously, Harry Maguire gave away a cheap corner and we hit them on the break. So I don't think that had anything to do with the shape or the formation. I think it was a bit of a nuance, if you like. I don't think it really, I wouldn't have said after half an hour it worked. I wouldn't have said it didn't work, but it certainly didn't from then on. I thought it was, to be honest, I had a lot of reservations about it pre-kickoff. 3 in midfield, Jorginho and Verratti particularly were going to dominate the game. I thought Mason Mount, despite the fact, in that 3-4-3, I'd have never picked him. We'll come on to that. But in a 4-2-3-1, doing a job on Jorginho, I feel like he could have done it. Do you know what I mean? I feel like he could have been in there and done a job on Jorginho and made it tough for him. So the shape baffled me, if I'm honest. I didn't understand what we were trying to achieve by that. It was, like you said, it was allowing them to have the ball, was it not?
Yeah, and at that time, during the game, especially in the second half, from about an hour onwards, and it probably had a few more, expletive, words that I can't repeat in it on here. But it was along the lines of, who on earth, or who do Chiellini and Bonucci think they are? 34 and 35 years old, stood on the halfway line, and like you said to me, not even stood on the halfway line, stood Chiellini overlapping, trying to get the ball out wide and put crosses into the box. Who on earth, my thoughts were at that time, who on earth do they think they are doing that? How do they think they have the right to play at that? As good as they've been all tournament, and against Belgium, I thought they were absolutely unbelievable, and they are great defenders. They should not be given the respect to be able to stand on their halfway line and pin us back. We were given the ball, as the game went on, it became more and more desperate. We were booming it, and they were unopposed for so long when it clearly wasn't working, and the ascendancy was with them. Why we didn't say, as basic as this may sound, Rashford, go and stand next to Bonucci and make him take 15 steps further back. Because at the time, I thought they were taking the mick. I really did. I thought they were taking the mick out of us in our own park. And I wasn't comfortable with it at all. And I think there was a moment in that game, around that time, around 60 minutes, the momentum was with them. Change it. Give them something else to think about. Because really, I don't remember us laying a glove on them in the second half. And with the players we had on the bench, that was the most frustrating thing for me. The respect we gave them when we shouldn't be giving anyone respect. They didn't give us a scrap of it, so why should we give them it?
That's absolutely correct. And you've touched on 2 or 3 points I want to talk about there. So first thing was obviously Chiellini overlapping and getting forward. Absolutely true. So we're going to talk second half specifically. First half, I thought it was a very even game. First half an hour, I thought we were a better side. Last 15 minutes of the first half, I thought they edged it. Over the course of the first half, very even. I'll score it just in England's favour. But second half was total domination, particularly for the first 20, 25 minutes. And you're looking at Chiellini and Bonucci playing centre-backs, and Chiellini is going wide, left, and he's not stood on the halfway line. He stood 10, 15 yards further forward than that halfway line. The utter cheek of the man to be getting forward, and you've got Jorginho and Verratti dropping so deep into the defensive line to get on the ball, and we're allowing them to do it. Nobody's pressing them. We're just allowing them to have the ball. And that's what frustrated me, was the acceptance that they could just have the ball without any pressure. And probably after 60 minutes, I turned around to one of my mates and I said, that I'm a big believer of the fact in football, when it's wave after wave of attack, as a defence, when you sit back with 10, 11 behind the ball and offer nothing, every time you get the ball, you just kick it back. Yeah, wave after wave. This is true, huh? You can only do that for 15 to 20 minutes before you concede. We'd done that from minute 45 up to minute 65. if they scored at about 67. It was coming. The warning signs were there. For me, 60 minutes, at 65 minutes, before they score, not when they score, Jack Grealish had to come on. We couldn't get out. We couldn't keep the ball. Who better to bring on and give the ball to under pressure, 2 players up his backside, real tight situations? Who will get out of it? Who will win fouls? Who will slow the game down? It was the perfect substitution. You couldn't wait for 1-1. You had to do it 1-0, and he didn't do that. And for me, that was one thing he did get wrong, was his substitutions.
Not to mention the fact that he also frightens the life out of everyone when he comes onto the pitch and no one wants to go near him when he's got the ball. On that, Mason Mount, now I coined this from a journalist that I read an article on the following day, hopelessly ineffective in the game, and that's with the greatest respect to Mason Mount. I think he's a very good player. I didn't think he had a great tournament, and I don't think he offered an awful lot. In that final, bit of a gamble playing him. You said it to me, shoehorning him in, really.
That's the exact words I used. Yeah, shoehorning him in.
Getting Mason Mount in the team, despite the fact that, it didn't...
That formation doesn't pick him.
It didn't feel right. It felt awkward. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And with the players on the bench that we have, with such talent, with such pace, everything that they wouldn't have wanted to face, why did it take him so long to get Mason Mount off? And why did it take him so long to see your likes of Rashford and Sancho, which was just to take a penalty?
Absolutely.
Grealish coming on in extra time. What was the thing? I don't understand why there's that reluctance to change the players that he clearly really likes when things aren't working. Because you got to think their 3 most dangerous players weren't on the pitch in extra time. Immobile, Chiesa, and Insigne were all taken off, I believe, in normal time, which, to be honest, did them a lot of favours because our 3 centre-halves then really had no one to mark. There were players dropping in and they weren't necessarily playing up against anyone. Making improper decisions, Mancini making the decision to change things that were not necessarily working, it paid off. Why is there a reluctance to do that with Gareth, do you think? I don't really know.
I don't know, because there are certain players where I think he's ruthless. There are certain times that substitution with Grealish was ruthless against Denmark. But then there were other things like we've mentioned, the Mason Mount. I hate to bang on about him, very good player and deserved to be, if he'd have started in the final, I have no problem with it. If he starts, like I said, if we go with 3 in midfield and he's one of the midfielders, 4-2-3-1, he's the number 10, and you say to him, you're in to press Jorginho, make it hard, Phillips goes up against Verratti, Rice plays defence midfield, it makes sense. But shoehorning him in on the right-hand side of a 3-4-3, what about Sancho? What about Saka? What about Grealish? I know Foden wasn't fit, but not the point. He wouldn't have been picked anyway. It was always going to be Mason Mount. And that doesn't sit well with me because there's a core of the team. There's Maguire, Kane, Pickford, Stones, Rice. That's 5 of those players. That's your spine. They'll play no matter what. But the rest of it for me, I don't know about you, tournament form should be picked on tournament form. How important do you think that was in regards to Gareth's selection?
Not as important as you might think. I feel that I think if everyone was fit, at least probably 10 of the players that he wanted to play against Croatia played in the final. So it feels like he had his team for the final if we were to get there in his mind before the tournament started. I look at Sterling, who was there on merit, absolutely, but I feel like he is clearly, well liked by Gareth and would have played anyway. Mason Mount didn't do anything of note in the entire tournament and was probably outshone by, a couple of players who come on for him throughout the tournament that didn't really get a sniff. So it did, but there were players like your likes of Harry Maguire, your likes of John Stones, Pickford, Walker, Rice, Phillips. I feel like they were all in there regardless. Not that they didn't all warrant it, but I feel like there wasn't. I didn't ever feel throughout the tournament there was going to be much change regardless of what happened, and that was about right. But if you're picking it purely on merit, I think Jack Grealish had a better tournament than Mason Mount, despite
100%.
playing probably half the amount of football. So It's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's a tough balance. The Southgate ultimately got more things right than wrong. He did, and I can't knock him for that. And my reservations were always, we've been saying all through the tournament, certain things he did paid off, and people throw his CV in his face, throw his CV in our face, and say, but it won, but he got us to a final, but he beat Germany, but he beat Croatia, but he got us to the first major final for 55 years. He did, and you can't knock that. There were moments and things that he did at certain points where it didn't cost us, but I felt like it would. And persevering with Mason Mount when you had superstars like Jack Grealish on the bench, I thought was a mistake that would cost us at some point. And it's easy to say that now. We lost on penalties. Did it cost us? I don't know, that's debatable. You can't really say either way because one kick of a football and it's a different story. But I feel that getting him on there at a different time, it's easy to say this with hindsight, would have gave us a better chance of winning that game.
That's absolutely right, and that's a great point to bring up. And an analogy I'd use is there's more than one recipe to cook the same dish. You know,
Yeah.
it's true though, isn't
That
it?
well-known phrase.
Yeah, exactly. I just made that one up. Write it down, get it out there because that's going to go viral, mate. But honestly, there is. And just because you win 2-0 against Germany playing the 3-4-3 match in their shape doesn't mean that if I'd have picked 4-2-3-1 with a totally different team, I wouldn't have won 2-0. Might have lost 1-0, might have won 3-0. Nobody knows because we didn't get the exposure to prove it. But ultimately, what you're saying is absolutely right. There were a lot of calls that I disagreed with, but ultimately he got to the final. He's got the green tick. I can't argue with it. The results are there. And like you said, you can flash the CV in the face all you want. There were still things, even though they've gone right, I would have done differently. But I'm happy to grade him. He had a good tournament. No disputing that. It was a very good tournament for Gareth Southgate. But one thing that did bug me in particular is the lack of substitutions. You look at pre-match, Chiellini, Italy's captain, talking about the fact that England's second string 11 could have got to the final. They recognise the depth of which we've got on the bench, and yet we barely touched our substitutes bench. And then you look at Italy, who absolutely raided theirs. That's the difference for me. You're looking like Jack Grealish. For me, like I said, you bring him on at 0-0. You bring him on at 0-0. Not nil. Sorry, what am I talking? 1-0. You bring him on when we're 1-0 up, right? You don't wait for 1-1. People think you bring him on when you need a goal. You're right, you do bring him on when you need a goal, but he's more than that. When you're under the cosh and you're 1-0 up and you're holding on, he's the perfect player to look after the ball. When for you was the perfect time to make that change?
I'd say an hour in. I thought an hour was probably about right. It gave him enough time to get into the game. It was at a time when Italy were on top. I think it would have gave us, more respite. I felt the players, Mason Mount obviously was struggling to get into the game, have any real meaningful impact. And Sterling has played a hell of a lot of football, and he looked pretty exhausted, to be honest. By that point, the game wasn't made for him. We weren't getting on the ball. He was doing a lot of running around, a lot of fruitless work. And I thought that was probably the time to get him on. And I do feel that it would have gave them something to think about at a time where they didn't really have anything to think about,
100%. So just quick one from you. Red card incidents. Jorginho, Chiellini. Talk to me. Were they red cards? Were either of those red cards?
Chiellini, no. Probably not. It's probably the most cynical foul I've ever seen in my life.
But it's a yellow card, I think, isn't it?
It's a yellow card. It's worse than it's probably the worst yellow card you will ever see, in the sense that it's one of those fouls. I always find it. They wind you up. It frustrates you. It almost feels so bad that it almost feels bad enough to give a red card for it, but it's not a red card tackle. It's one of those that is on the cusp. It is as bad as a yellow card challenge can be without it becoming a red. Do you know what I mean? I don't see how it was so cynical. It was so to watch. It was borderline assault, but it was still only a yellow card, and I still find that hard to stomach, really. But as for Jorginho, I don't know what the ref's doing there. It was a red card, and I don't know why VAR didn't step in. It was probably the worst decision I'd seen at the Euros and the games I'd watched. And I felt there was a 50-50 penalty that could have gone our way at one stage as well. So I don't think the referee was great in that final, but the standard of refereeing was very good on the whole, so I can't really moan. Jorginho, very lucky to be on the pitch. Luckily for us, it wasn't his penalty that won them it. if it was, that would have been quite a tough pill to take. But no, Jorginho's was a stonewall red card for me.
All right, just to finish us off on this section of the final. Obviously, it's been quite hard to. Again, I'll just reiterate, it's been quite hard to talk about this because it's still a bit close to home, if I'm honest, talking about this because it's really tough to take. When you get that close, sometimes it's just easier when you go out in the group, and it's a bit less emotional anyway. But the penalty takers, obviously, Gareth Southgate's come in for a lot of criticism regards to penalty takers, but I want to back him here. I want to say that, albeit, look, Jadon Sancho coming on as a substitution, I never, being brutally honest, I never fancied him to score a penalty. But if he sees him in training every day, I've never seen him take a penalty at the end of the day, so he could be the best penalty taker in the squad. I was just going on gut feeling. No, nothing to it, just pure gut feeling. Same with Saka, but I would have backed Rashford all day. I've seen Rashford take high pressure penalties, and you know what? I read a lot of people saying about subbing them on fresh legs when they hadn't kicked the ball. But then also there is the other argument of asking somebody to take a penalty after playing 120 minutes when you're cramping up. So, if he thinks that's the right thing to do you know what? We won against Colombia, and I know the Nations League is not quite the same, but we won a shootout against Switzerland. So I'm happy to back him all day. You mentioned earlier, it's a lottery, and I'm not having people blaming anybody for that.
No, absolutely not. It is a lottery. But Southgate, you cannot deny and you cannot ever knock his preparation. Every decision, every possibility is thought about. He is clearly very meticulous with preparation for penalty shootouts and the way things happen. Jack Grealish put himself forward, and it's easy to say that now. I think he's missed his last 2 penalties for Villa, and he hasn't took a penalty for about 2 years for Aston Villa. Marcus Rashford, like you said, high pressure penalties absolutely would have been probably, for me, the second name on the list behind Kane.
Me too.
So there's no question to that. He put the keeper the wrong way. He's at the outside of the post. It's one of those things. Raheem Sterling missed quite a few penalties for Man City. He's took some terrible penalties. He's not a great or a recognised penalty taker. As simple as that. He's a very good player. He's not a recognised penalty taker. The defenders, again, you're probably not looking at them to be, you don't really want to be calling up on them.
Harry Maguire, best penalty you've ever seen?
Yeah, that's it. No, you're absolutely right. It was the best. It probably was the best penalty I've ever seen. It was incredible. But you're still looking to your attacking players to take penalties, and they've had the confidence to step up and say, "Yes, I'll have one." You can't knock someone who says, "I want to take it." Do you go up to, for argument's sake, and this is not true, or to my knowledge, this isn't true, but hypothetically, he goes up to Kyle Walker and says, "Do you want to take a penalty?" And he says, "No, I don't." And he says, "Why are you taking one?" Is that good management? Is that good? Is that good for the marathon? Absolutely not. You've had 5 players that are all confident taking a penalty. 3 of them have missed. That doesn't happen very often in my recent, immediate recollection. I've only remembered one game where I've seen a team miss 3 penalties in a row, and that was a 2007 charity, Community Shield between, Man United and Chelsea. I remember Chelsea missed their first 3, and we won 3-0. That doesn't happen very often. We were very unlucky, and you can't. The difficulty is we've lost, like you said, a lottery. We've prepared as well as we could. It didn't work out. Donnarumma's about 7 foot tall. He made the goal look like a 5-a-side goal. I could not believe how big he was. There was nothing to aim at in the goal. And on a different day, we're European champions. And another Southgate, masterclass in a big game, if you like. It didn't work out. You cannot knock the lads for what happened. It's just one of those cruel things that I still can't believe. I can't. Like you said, it's hard to sort of talk about, think about, but it's one of those things, and it's probably the most positive I've ever been after losing a game, because I feel like we've gave it a hell of a shot, and on a different day, we are European champions. It hasn't quite worked out, but what can you do?
It's coming, mate. It's coming. Believe me when I say it. Improving year on year, and that is the next section. We're going to talk about how can England improve.
trying to end on a positive note, forever the optimist. Next year's World Cup, it's really not far away. Qatar, obviously, in the Winter World Cup, absolutely ridiculous. That's another story. I'm confident going into it. I feel like we're improving all the time. I think players will be a season on, another season on thereabouts, more experience, and I feel like it's moulding well for the next, 2 tournaments, if you like. Ben, how can we improve going into that World Cup? What would you be looking to implement, or what would you do differently going into the next World Cup over the next sort of year or so?
Well, it's difficult because obviously I feel like we've got so much depth, particularly in those three players behind Harry Kane, that you can't really say, well, not in my head anyway, you can't really nail down a core, because right now you'd be saying that it was like Sterling, Mount and another on the right-hand side, because that's how it's been in this tournament. But end of next season, so many games have happened. It's not like Harry Kane, where I can write that name down on the sheet of paper now. If he's fit, he plays. Do you know what I mean? So much of the team will be, there is a core, we've discussed it. Declan Rice will be there, Harry Kane will be there, Maguire will be there, but even John Stones, Joe Gomez comes back, has a good season. You never know, do you? Kyle Walker, Trent Alexander-Arnold comes in, Reece James has a good season. So there's probably only 3 or 4 right now that you can implement and put down on a sheet of paper. But then I'm looking around the squad, mate, and just to list, I haven't got a list in front of me, just to off the top of my head. So here goes. I'll name you a few. Bellingham, Saka, Foden, Sancho. There's just sort of 4 off the top of my head. They're all a year and a half older, right? You're looking at like Grealish, Kane, Sterling, Maguire, Stones, all in the primes of their career. And then the more experienced lads, the Hendersons and the Walkers, they're only a year older. They're not. They're still everything that they are now. So I feel like the squad comes on, and you're looking at a player like Jude Bellingham. The kid's a monster, mate. He's a monster. He's going to be 19 years old. He may develop into being one of the first names on the team sheet. You really don't know. But what I can tell you is we've got so much depth and so many options that as a side, it is almost a matter of fact, really, that we will have improved. But what I will put on record is that doesn't mean that we will get to a final or we will improve on this result, because ultimately you can have 2 parallel universes, and in one of them you go out of the round of 16 to France, and in the other one you go on and win the tournament. These things can happen, but as a core group, we will have improved.
Obviously, you named several, players that I look at as superstars, future superstars that we have, that are only going to improve. Getting them into the team, however, seems like a different proposition. Do we? Well, to me, and this can sound really harsh, to me, we need to find a way of getting your Fodens or Grealish into that team to kick on to the next level. Is that a necessity? If we're being honest, can this 11, although they got so close this time, is this 11 going to get us to the next final, or do you feel that we have to find a way of getting Foden, Grealish, Sancho, perhaps Saka, your Bellinghams into the team on a more consistent basis to really kick us on to that, World Cup winners or European champions? Is that really what we need to do? Because I feel like it sort of is.
It's a good question. The answer for me is, look, first off, I would have had your likes of Grealish and Foden, for example, in the probably strongest 11 this year, right? Gareth didn't. And back to what you said earlier about shoving the CV in your face and saying, I got to a final, but I still would have, even now that we've got to a final and lost, I still would have had Grealish in my side. Do you know what I mean? There's different ways of doing things. For me, yes, I think we're blessed. We've got so many options. He can go his way, which he's done this year, and get to a final, and he could go the same route next year, and we could anticipate that we'll do fairly well. Depending on the draw and things like that, we will do pretty well. We'll be one of the better sides there. I'm pretty sure of that. Being a top 3-4 sides there. Having said that, I personally would go a different route, and it would be about, I've talked about him before, Grealish, Foden and Mount. I look at those 3, and I think you just have to try and get 2 of them in. And not talking square pegs in round holes, because I don't like square pegs in round holes, but Grealish, I like him in the middle, but he plays on the wing as well. Same with Foden. I'd like to get him in the middle, but he plays on both wings for Man City. There's options there. There's fluidity there. There's a lot of interchange. Raheem Sterling, Mason Mount, all of these different players. Jude Bellingham, how good could he be in a year's time? So, yes, in answer to your question, I think there will need to be a few changes. Probably players that are a little bit better on the ball, looking after the ball. So I'm looking at Grealish and Foden. That's who I'm probably building the side round along with Harry Kane.
In terms of what can we do? What's the easiest thing to implement? What's the easiest improvement we can make without any real structural changes or tactical? What's just the easiest thing that Southgate can do to get more out of this team?
Do you know what, mate? That's a great question. What do you think the answer is? Answer your own question.
I think it's just comes down to utilising the subs better.
Great point. Yeah, great point.
That's the real. You come back to. I think that's what's tipped it for Italy. That's what made it more difficult for us. And throughout the competition, I thought he didn't always use his subs that well. I never felt like there was there wasn't really any games that I thought was won or lost. Was really changed by a. I say that obviously Grealish coming on was an obvious one, but I feel like that was pretty much the exception. I never felt that substitutions ever made much of an impact, and they were never given much of an opportunity. With the players we got, I think that's quite an easy or an easy way to get more of these lads in.
Just quickly, can I ask you on that? That's a great point. But do you think Grealish coming on and making an impact, do you think that worked against him?
In the sense that,
well, for me, he's a starter, right? But then after he's coming on against Germany and having an impact, and he's come on in a few games and he's had an impact, people are then turning around and saying, well, he's had such an impact off the bench. Why would you start him? And I get that. But I personally would have started him. The point is, what they were trying to get at, like one of my mates was saying, yeah, but because I was saying, I think it was the Ukraine game, you go with Grealish in place of Mount. But he was saying, obviously we won 4-0. Yeah, but if you go with Mount and it's 0-0 and you're struggling, you can bring Grealish on. But you can't do it the other way round. How you don't know if Mount's an impact sub. And there is a point there, but I feel like you're holding it against him for being a good player.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think you're right. I think it did work against him because ultimately you can be labelled as a super sub, and I think that's probably Jack's what worked against him. And I don't know if that's an unfair label, but I think it was probably about right. He's the Harry Redknapp way of thinking. I remember a story he told that he brought someone on. He would bring a player on and they'd score from the bench and say, "Oh, what a great change that was, Harry! What a great substitution." He said, "Well, I should have had him on I should have had him on from the start." That was my mistake, and I'm of that thinking. I feel with a player like Grealish, the more the ball you give him, the more time you give him, the more dangerous he is. I don't feel like I think the same outcome. Those games we win. If he starts, then if he comes on, I don't feel like it's a different story. I just think we score earlier on in the game, perhaps. I think we're more dangerous in the game. We look more fluid. We terrify teams more. Obviously, it's worked out, and I think that probably is his biggest problem. But I don't see how you could be so good even as a sub and not be given a start and be given more of a starting berth in that team, because he was, he's just sensational.
And in the game against Czech Republic where he did start, he was good. I thought he was good for good 50 minutes. He slowed up the last sort of 10 before he went off 50 to 60, but I thought he was really good. Looking at the side next year, and obviously one thing I would say in terms of where something I'd do differently and improve would be like Foden and Grealish. So I'm saying get those two in, and I'd like to get them in central areas. Now, I feel as though, even though it's served us well, the Rice and Phillips combination, for certain fixtures, it is slightly pragmatic. So when you're playing a Scotland, when you're playing a Ukraine, I don't feel like it's needed. Now, there is a place for it in the big games. I think there's two answers here. So in the games where you're going to have 70% of the ball, you probably can play Grealish and Foden in midfield with a Rice. Yeah? Against the bigger sides, I don't think you can do that. I think it's a bit too imbalanced. And I think that answer, maybe it's a bit early to say, but I just think he's going to be a superstar. And he's probably the closest I've seen to a Steven Gerrard at the same age. I think the answer could be Jude Bellingham. If he kicks it on a year from now, you could be looking at, because he's not cheating, is he? You're looking at Foden and Grealish, and it's cheating a little bit, if you know what I mean. But if you throw a Bellingham into that mix, he's as box to box as I've seen. Do you know what I mean? And that's a potential change where I think we would improve in terms of the balance of that midfield. Is slightly more. It's less pragmatic. It's slightly more offensive, but not at the expense of balance.
No, I think it's a great point, and I think the future on that basis is bright. And I'm gutted, mate. I'm gutted that we won't see England play in a major tournament for 18 months. I wish there was one in 3 months' time. I wish, there was something around the corner. The feeling around the side, and I've fell in love with watching England play, which I've never really had in my lifetime. It was a chore. It was a dead 2 weeks when there was an international break. It was negative. It was just letdown after letdown. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, they gave Sam Allardyce the England job.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't see a way out. We were in a dark hole as a country in terms of the way everything was run. And it's been absolutely dragged out of that. And it's to the point where, every day you feel more optimistic and more belief that we could actually win something. So 18 months' time, I already can't wait. I already can't wait. And I think we've got one hell of a chance. What an exciting time it is.
It is. It's amazing, mate. And do you remember on the last show we did, just before the Denmark game, I asked you, will Gareth Southgate be a Sir? What do you think?
Yeah, I think he will. Yeah, I
think he will.
Maybe not right now, but he will be at some point.
He will be at some point. Mate, I think he's coming home. I think Qatar next year. I think that's the one. Just to round us off tonight, mate. I haven't told you I'm going to do this, but a quick song from you. Go on, lead. Go on.
I haven't got anything.
It's coming home.
Yeah,
it's coming.
I thought about it.
Come on, mate. You're better than that. Hey, cheers for joining me.
Voice, really.
Yeah, of course you have. Cheers for joining me tonight, mate. And I hope you're feeling a bit better. Obviously, England fans listening, it has been tough, but also it's been one of the best tournaments in our lifetime. It's been the best tournament for 55 years. And like I said, in some ways, football really did come home. The scenes at Wembley, the atmosphere around the country, and the support from the lads was phenomenal. You'll never forget Euro 2021. Cheers for listening, and catch you soon, guys. Take care of yourself, mate.
Yeah, cheers, mate. See you later.